So over the years, I've found that I own a lot of terrain, both purchased stuff and stuff that I've made that goes back well over 10 years or more. So I laid it all out on a table this holiday season. I thought, what if I painted all of it? If I could get this all done before the end of the holiday, I would at last have everything finished.
Alas, he does not.
But first, we make coffee. Okay, so we're going to start out with everything already primed with a lead belcher equivalent base. I've done a comparison video if you're interested. Next, I'm going to paint a brown trim around the base where all the dirt is. I'm just using generic craft paint that you can pick up super cheap anywhere. And it's, pretty basic brown. I've watered it down so it's nice and thin and gets into all the cracks. It's kind of a yucky color. I call this the poop it up phase. Each to their own. One thin coat on this is usually more than enough because I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff over that later. Next up, I'm going to use this kind of dark gray color to help offset some of the primed grays for the buildings and stones. Here you can see it's really, really watered down. And I'm just kind of patching it on there loosely. It's going to be very, very thin and not really all that obvious actually once it's done. After that, I start with a lighter gray. Mix it a little bit thicker. Again, there's no real rhyme or reason to this. One of the things that I love about painting terrain is it's a lot more like traditional painting. You don't need to really be all that precise with it. You can just kind of go with your feeling at the moment. And it's especially nice with really old, kind of not that great terrain. If you've got some terrain that you just whipped together and you're not all that proud of, do creative stuff with it. Go to town on it. As a notorious scholar and elementary school wizard once said, take chances, make mistakes, get messy. It'll be okay. Here you see I'm being really loose again. I'm just slapping this paint on in patches. I want kind of a patchy quality to it to eventually mimic a more stone-like or concrete look. Then I come back over it with water to help thin it out and get some rivulets and run it down into spaces and also just to blend it. If it's a little bit too wet, I just dab it. That also adds texture, especially on rough stone like this. Paper towel texture is actually pretty close. And in some cases, I'll use it more as a traditional dry brush. Being really loose and not really constricted to any particular technique at this point, I find is just worth it in the long run. It opens you up, it makes the whole experience a lot more fun, and you don't feel like a huge amount of terrain is a real tedious task. After that, I come back in with a thin brown-black wash. This is a really common technique. Almost every terrain crafter knows how to do this. It's just acrylic paint, really thin with water, and it looks darker when it goes on, but I guarantee you it thins out quite a bit as it dries. I get it down into all the nooks and crannies, the corners where shadows would gather, all the cracks, where you want it to be dark. I've also went in and added some printed out posters to my buildings. Even on really rude and crude, old buildings like these, they really make a difference. They help ground it into the space, and they're just a ton of fun. There's a lot of them out there to choose from. Again, I'm coming through with just that black wash, getting it into the corners, getting it into the cracks so that it kind of acts almost like shadows. And then I'll also, again, use a really wet pass where I let it run down and drip to create sort of a runny texture that mimics really old concrete. I'm by no means a high quality painter, as you can tell. This stuff isn't great, but I'm happy with it because it's mine and I've got it done and it's on the table. So I'm just going across, a lot of these corners and crevices and surfaces just to get it all kind of covered to a uniform mix. Now, this is looking really bad with all these drips. Obviously, I'm not going to leave it like that. So I come back with a completely dry makeup brush, borrowing a technique from one of my favorite artists who's on that cup to the left there. I just kind of brush it away. I dab at the drips and dribbles, and the brush soaks up quite a bit of that really watery paint, but it also feathers it out, which at this scale of painting, we can use those kind of more traditional techniques. All right. After the black, I'm going to add some warmth to the stone with this caramel color. This is more of a traditional heavy dry brush. A lot of painters call it overbrushing. I'm using another dry makeup brush here, and you can see how it kind of catches onto the highlights and the top level surfaces and just adds some warmth to that. I'm not going to leave the stone this color, but I really think it's important to get a little bit of warmth into stone, so it's not all flat gray. Then I come back and I hit the dirt with a overbrush of a green mossy color. And then I overbrush around all of the broken and battle damaged parts with black. And that really helps mimic a charred effect. This is the first time I've actually ever done this, and I was extremely happy with the result. And so I just kind of went to town on all the buildings. And then on this crater here, I even used it in kind of a heavier pass to add, blast streaks and blast marks to it. You can see that I've already done the inside on that as well. Next up, I'm coming back over all of the stone with a bright gray. It's not quite white. It's kind of like a sky gray color. And this is a very traditional dry brush pass. I've scrubbed off a lot of paint on the brush, and so it's only going to catch those really high details. Very straight up, old school dry brushing technique here. Nothing fancy. But you can see how it really brings out that quality in the stone. Okay, all the painting's done, believe it or not. So now it's time to add some flock. This is a custom mix of flock that I blended a bunch of different versions, both grit and flocking and clump flocking. So I'm just using regular school glue here, just straight out of the bottle. Just to create kind of a nice place to jab this stuff into. I kind of wanted to just cling to the corners for the most part. I don't want a real heavy or uniform flocking on these pieces. I'm just going as fast as I can on a lot of this stuff. I got a lot of terrain to cover, and I'm already knowing I'm way, way behind and not going to be able to finish more than a quarter of what was on that table at the beginning. So I want some of that moss in these cracks between these stones, and just getting it in, getting it done. Hey, not too bad. And now I need to lock in all that flocking. So here I've got a bottle of isopropyl alcohol, and what this does is it helps break the surface tension on the flocking to allow PVA glue, especially watered down PVA glue, to seep into all that material. So I've got a custom bottle of, I've watered it down roughly, I think, a third PVA glue to water. And by itself, putting it on top of this flock, it just sits there. Like, this stuff's really thin, but it still just sits there. It doesn't get into the flock. You could end up putting like way too much of this stuff on and you won't get to all of your flock. The isopropyl alcohol will reduce the surface tension and it just soaks up into this flocking like you wouldn't believe. Like, this is actually, again, the first time I've tried this technique as well, and I was stunned by how much it just went right into all the flocking. I could even use it on top of the existing drops of glue to help get them to seep into the flocking, and then I could come back over the top of it if I thought it had more. It really helped to reduce like how much of the glue mixture I needed to actually put in. Now this is looking fairly saturated and I think I overdid it quite a bit. Luckily my base was really sealed and didn't end up warping. I wouldn't recommend going quite this heavy. Maybe use a finer tipped applicator to go a little bit lighter so you don't saturate your base with liquid and risk warping it if it's made out of MDF or cardboard. Thin cardstock or cardboard can warp pretty easily with this amount of moisture. Well, that's it. Obviously, I didn't end up painting an entire table full of terrain. I started with some of my oldest pieces that had been sitting in primer on a shelf for well over a century or two. The finished results, they're not amazing, I'll admit it, but I know that they'll get played with, and they'll bring a lot more atmosphere and life to the game than before, and that's all I really need them to do. From a personal viewpoint, it's great to just finally have these projects that I started ages ago done to a tabletop ready standard, and now I can move on to more detailed work with one less guilt monkey on my back. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you got something out of it. If nothing else, just knowing that other people are out there making good old regular basic and boring tabletop terrain and enjoying the process of it might be enough to help you get motivated to finish up some of your own, or to throw away that bunch of junk that's just been laying in a bin in the back of your closet for 12 years. Alright, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and all that business. Catch you next time. So many guilt monkeys.